We are Beyond Yesterday, and this is our truth.
Of course the Payday gang don't meet their end so meekly. Why do you think Duke dedicated so many years to researching the Kataru? Bane's infection with the Mercy virus was a thorn in their side, but certainly wasn't enough to make them rush into a heist like the one planned at the White House. As the dentist moved, so did they. They weren't going to be the Payday cycle presiding over the end of the world. Temples did fall, but so did Hellman's connections, impeding his progress, but more importantly, isolating the corrupt king. After all, they were banking on him showing up for one final encounter. For this is truly the final story of Payday. Duke had puzzled over the obsidian plate for weeks. Since connecting it to the rest of the king's device, they'd been able to get nothing from it. At last, with Bane back, he'd be able to ask the old heister a few questions. Sheer force of will is what kept Bane awake and his heart beating, but delirious as he may have been, no one understood Cagliostro's manuscript like Bane. In his delirium, he spoke of prophecies and assertions he'd heard the dentist mention to Kento whilst at Hell's Island. Another will die, the last will ascend, and no king shall fall while the Irin serve. According to Bane, this explained the dentist's actions and seeming immortality. You see, lament was the key to this process of ascension, allowing the Kataru kings to live beyond their normal lifespan in a new body. The first prophecy is what made Hellman, the healer and most ambitious king, move against the others, intent on making certain that it was he who ascended and lived on. But with individuals of such power fighting on a global scale, we see where the very fabric of the world was at stake. Nephilim and nukes would be all it took. Things were now coming to a head because the dentist was panicking. Once a king loses his watcher, he becomes vulnerable. Mortal, even. Kento was now dead, and this was their chance. Bane implored Duke to bring over the diamond, which Vlad, the king's scribe, had returned. He told Duke to place his hand on the old Cagliostro manuscript. It held one last answer the crew would need for the trials to come. Reaching out to pick up the Guide of Bane, Duke felt a warmth emanating from beneath his hand. As the temperature reached a scorching level, he recoiled, only to see the guide, which in many ways had landed them in this predicament, up in flames. With seemingly no way to stop the blaze, the old book was burned through, and all that remained was a single word: Guide. The remaining pages were unrecognisable. Duke realised this was Bane's plan all along. No chance for anyone else to be sucked into the madness of seeking Baldwin's lament. The possibility of an end to the cyclical ages of the Kataru, if only one could get to the lament before the dentist. With no more clues to comb through, Duke was at a loss. The dentist was lashing out like a dying animal, concentrating his murky forces in the capital as he travelled to force open the temples. Time was running out. Whenever Duke hit a wall in his experiments on the device, he'd often head into the nearest room, Tony's elaborate office, to reset and refocus himself. An able musician, the grand piano gave him an opportunity for a moment's respite. But this time, something was different. Duke needed to replicate a tune that had been buzzing around in his head for weeks. It was an old melody his mother used to hum to him as a child, a happy memory that was now offsetting his focus. The combination of notes came to him without much thought. The oldest known melody, the Hurrian hymn number 6. After playing the melody's final B flat, all of a sudden, the obsidian plate resonated. Before the device had reacted to sound, but this was more than that. The whole device was responding to the song, and with it, the rings had ceased to rotate, and new text had become legible. Written in the same Kataru language Duke had deciphered when they first got their hands on the king's coffers, they each appeared to be a unique prophecy, centered around a mythical set of 4 thieves completing great feats of larceny back in ancient times. This couldn't have been a coincidence. Over the years, across the many heists they'd performed, there were clear parallels that could be drawn with the 20 tasks the device had laid out in front of them. Starting fires and stealing weapons of death, crime as the earth shook, a hit on a boat without bloodshed. Of course, the dentist had coveted the coffers as an insurance policy. The Kataru contraption wasn't meant for kings, angels, or demons. It was meant for the common band of thieves, whose duty it was to keep those powers in check. By taking it out of the Payday gang's hands, the dentist aimed to deny fate a chance at stopping him. But it was too late. They were more than worthy. Now, they simply needed to step up to their roles. The breakthrough may have encouraged the crew, but it hadn't changed the fact that Bane was fading rapidly. Providence may have been on their side, but it wasn't on the aging heisters. The Watcher's place in the story was all but through, but that didn't stop him from insisting on joining Locke for this joint operation to hit the White House. With signs of radiation and the president fleeing the capital, now seemed the perfect time to seek the Ark and foil the dentist simultaneously. Knowing that this had every chance of being a one-way trip, the White House heist was left to only the four most worthy: Hoxton, Dallas, Chains and Wolf. Those who'd now worked alongside each other for almost a decade, the four unlikely heroes. Their progress was to be closely followed by Duke, waiting beside the obsidian plate to translate any Kitaru text they might meet on their journey down. A guide, just as he'd been told he would be. As the gang set off from the safe house, Bane discussed his old plan for hitting the White House. The Kitaru madness had left it obsolete, but his original intention was to infiltrate the Presidential Emergency Operating Center and escape with the famed Lincoln pardons. If the White House was home to an ancient Kitaru site of power, it would be deep underground in the same East Wing at the core of the Peok. Nothing was concrete, but for now they'd be following Bane's original plan that had been years in the making. There was little point in approaching this heist silently anymore. The Payday gang was staking their existence on this gamble, they may as well do it in style. Locke's suggestion of wearing murky water disguises did, however, give the ground team that element of surprise. Enough time for Locke to fly his chopper clear before a hail of bullets rang out across the south portico entrance. Even the impending shadow of the Nephilim wasn't enough to dissuade their assault. The four charged through the atrium, pushing to the west wing after hacking corresponding coloured door control panels situated around the entrance. From there, it was straight towards the presidential suite itself, now in lockdown after the breach of security was called in. Fortunately, the Murkies employed to defend the dentist had left ample tools of war lying around the building, thermite included, allowing them to burn through to the office without doing it any structural harm. There, behind a painting, was the safe they were looking for. Using Wolf's pride and joy, an original model wired drill to break through the Mark II secure safe without it ever jamming. As Joy had predicted, the Peok keycard was theirs, and after pushing back against the escalating murky assault, all the way to the East Hall, the gang found what they were looking for. The Peok was, as expected, already at DEFCON 1, as military personnel and Murky Water soldiers alike flooded in, seemingly with one purpose: stop the Payday gang from going any further. Bane had suspected that his crew would know exactly what they were looking for when they saw it. The Kitaru model vault first drew their attention, indicating just how ostensibly connected the dentist had been to the US government. But if his plans were to come to fruition, he would have more than a pervasive influence on how the world was ran. With Air Force One reportedly down, Bane had pieced his plan together. A reincarnation into the body of the most powerful man on Earth. An unthinkable outcome that would leave the Payday gang hounded for the rest of their lives. That's assuming the world could sustain itself in an all-out war of the kings. That thought lingering, it was then that they saw it. A painting in the Peok conference room emanating a strange light. The figure adorning the painting was one they'd seen before. Kknowley, the Aztec god of the dead. It was Patient Zero's neck tattoo at Mercy Hospital. The Fates, or maybe the dentist himself, was playing a cruel trick on the Payday gang. Just as it was Bane's gateway to Mictlan, the underworld, it was implied that his crew would be going the same way, quite literally this time. After lifting the painting off its restraints, the crew prepared the breach into the hidden chamber of the White House. Duke assured them this was the right place, citing the door pattern's similarity to that of the dig site painting from the Diamond. Sure enough, hidden behind the wall was seemingly an old mine shaft, barely lit and spiraling towards a further descent underground. Peculiarly, once in the confines of the underground system, the dentist's mercs immediately ceased their pursuit. The crew, now alone, headed deeper underground, after some time losing communication with their eyes on the surface, Locke. Odd, since they could still contact Duke. Something was up, but for now all they could do was forge onward, further into the darkness. Finally, the unstable lift bounced to a halt. In front of the gang stood a set of 4 massive levers, all connected to what seemed to be a giant circular clock face, etched onto which was the Kitaru alphabet, repeated 3 times on 3 layers in unique patterns. The architecture surrounding them was an odd combination of archaic, modern, and alien. Nothing about the technology aligned or looked right within the cold walls of a cavern. Almost as if multiple generations of human culture had collided with some cosmic entity to create an entranceway. This had to be the final test of the Ark, and Duke's purpose as the guide. As Dallas touched the centerpiece of the wheel, the outer section retreated into the contraption, and a shrill, inhuman sound echoed around the chamber. The final inference of the obsidian plate was coming to fruition, as servants of the Nephilim and guardians of the Ark emerged quite literally from the walls and thin air to protect their secrets from being unearthed. These, what can only be called creatures, attacked like animals, sharing their likenesses with who we know as the Egyptian gods Bastet and Anubis. In actuality, judging by their supernatural abilities, Duke was right to assume that they served a force far more primordial than that. Carrying out the will of their Nephilim creators, these guardians were a living testament to the reality that the world of Payday could not source its origin to traditional scientific belief. However, it didn't matter how ancient or celestial they were, bullets worked just fine, and years fending off cloakers had prepared the gang for their combat style. Unfortunately, their numbers seemed to be endless, meaning the puzzle the crew faced had to be completed whilst under siege, and within a time window limited by their ammunition supply. In the madness, it would have been easy to miss the 4th segment of Kataru characters that had just emerged from the Great Device. This time, the letters were placed to form a sentence, a riddle for Duke to decipher. He quickly ascertained that the solution had to be a 5-letter word, and his familiarity with the Kataru language meant he was able to narrow the options down immediately. The first riddle read, "I stand in front of the humble man on the wicked path as a companion." Remembering back to the illustrations in Cagliostro's guide, it was a sword placed in front of the humble man which could lead him to wickedness. After instructing the crew to pull different levers around the room to spell out the word, yet another question was posed. Again, cryptic, but Duke's knowledge of the Kataru's own mythology and past experiences with their puzzles made this child's play. Drawing on all he'd learned of stars, gods, and the guide itself, Duke was successfully able to navigate the crew through a series of 4 riddles in total, one for each who had earned their right to enter. As the lever was pulled for their 4th and final answer, the room filled with a bright light, dispersing the charging guardians as the panel rose into the cavern roof. An entranceway to an even more hidden chamber. Stumbling exhausted through the corridor carved out in the rock, the 4 men became the first humans to lay eyes on this marvel in over 2 centuries. There it was, the Ark of the Watcher. Throughout history it had many names, but now it was known as Baldwin's Lament. As the gang marvelled at the scale of it, they noticed the chalky remains of a body. This must have been Baldwin, and his death at its hands was the reason why the structure in front of them was known as his lament. All that remained of poor Baldwin was a watcher's ring and the imprint of a hand moulded from the gold it once held. The markings leading up to the lament gave some indication to the nature of how it all functioned. The alchemical symbols for salt, mercury, lead, antimony and gold revealed all the components required for an ascension to take place. As they studied their surroundings further, the strange serenity of their predicament was shattered by a familiar, measured voice.
Dallas, it would be prudent of you to open the door and allow me entrance, lest I must put Bane and Locke out here to a rather grim and lead-filled end.
The dentist was at the gates. Unable to enter as the thieves were, he needed the Payday gang to accept his request for entrance into the mausoleum. Their decision was not so simple though. Hellman held hostages. Bane and Locke were supposedly at the barrel of his gun, and there wasn't the time to call his bluff. It certainly explained why they'd lost contact back in the elevator. Walking carefully toward the entrance again, the lock mechanism responded to the worthy, opening at last for the dentist. For the first time in several years, since Dallas first met him, their eternal nemesis was before them, in the flesh, stood next to a wheelchair-bound Bane and holding Locke at gunpoint. Before a second could pass, the Payday gang acted on instinct. A watcherless king was very much so mortal. For millennia, the dentist had been untouchable, so it was little surprise that he didn't consider the very real possibility that a heavily armed gang of born killers could gun him down without a second thought. An oversight he was given only moments to regret, as a fatal shot pierced his skull. The dentist fell, dead on impact. In an instant, one of the kings was no more, a cataclysmic change to the world's balance. As if responding to the death of the king, the very ground began to shake. Something was happening on the surface. In any case, the cavern was no longer a safe place to be, but Bane knew the Great Pyramid that lay before them was their only chance to return alive. The lament may have consumed Baldwin, but history wasn't about to repeat itself. Bane had deduced that Baldwin had failed to stop the dentist in 1814 due to picking the wrong tools. US Treasury bullion had been deemed impure by the ARG, backfiring and turning the Watcher to dust. He'd also finally solved the mystery of Overdrill, the Hector connection. The drug lord didn't set out to betray the gang. He was another unfortunate pawn, doomed from the moment he agreed to Bane's deal for the mine gold. Said gold just so happened to be of the right purity required to activate the Ark of the Watcher safely. From the moment it was taken from the First World Bank, the Kataru had swarmed. The dentist likely aided in Hector's original conviction and betrayal, and then assisted the Payday gang in enacting Hoxton's forced revenge to get his hands on Hector's gold. But now, thanks to the dentist's miscalculation, it was in the gang's possession. As ancient as the Ark itself, this was its purpose, slotting neatly into the symmetrical grooves surrounding the pyramid. The catalyst for ascension. Just as it seemed like the White House itself was about to collapse and make this their tomb, a blinding light enveloped the chamber. The lament was activating at the behest of a human.
Okay, guys. This is where reality becomes legend.
5 of the crew awoke on the surface, but Bane was nowhere to be seen. The world seemed much the same as before, but strangely, it was as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The crew may not have found those famed pardons, but in some way, they felt free. Regrouping in the eerily quiet safe house, it was decided that it was time to lie low. They just about had their fill of DC for now. Calling all 4-man squads to a secondary meetup location, those old offshore funds would finally be put to use. Travelling to an unknown location somewhere in the heat of the tropics, the crew surrounded themselves with luxury, from thieves to kings in their own right. In the days that followed, the 46th president was found in a condition far better than anyone could have expected. Now, as the gang tuned in from their offshore hideaway, he was making his first official statement after weeks of silence. At the conference, he made a presentation. To Commissioner Garrett, the highest accolade was awarded, the Medal of Valor. You see, it had been reported in the aftermath of the White House terrorist scare, the Payday gang had attempted to take advantage of the instability in a daring attempt on the riches of the White House. The commissioner and his task force had been deployed and finally put an end to their spree of crime. All lies, but a set of lies that bought the gang their freedom. But why was this president offering them an out? Well, as the president finished his rousing speech petitioning for a hard-working society willing to cooperate and inspire one another, there was one telling quirk. His final words, "Let's do this." It was obvious. Just as his body had succumbed to the virus, the lament had gone to work. As the dentist had planned for himself, Bane was, in all but appearance, now the President of the United States. The Payday gang had truly pulled off the greatest heist of all. Not only had they earned their own freedom, they did so by stealing the nation from the grasp of the corrupt and manipulable ruler that had gone before. In the days and weeks that followed, some members chose to return to their old lives sooner than others. Giro and Clover pined for the nostalgia of home. The Butcher was given hair pay and a little revenge for Alaska. Others, like Sangles and Sokol, thirsted for more, chasing further fame and fortune in their own solo exploits. If you listen to the speculation, Hoxton decided casino ownership was to his liking. But, as we've learned over the past weeks, the truth isn't always so simple. These are just rumours and hearsay too. Can you imagine Hox settling down, entering the corporate space? No. There are still those of us out there who wonder, even after all they'd been through, even as the Kataru slinked back into the shadows and the Murky Water mercenary group went bankrupt, whether the greatest heist of all was still yet to come.
Baby, you know about the autumn, when the leaves are falling down, yeah. Oh, and all the pretty flowers slowly wither to the ground. All the birds that stayed the summer spread their wings and fly away. And the sun that used to shine so bright goes to hide behind the gray. Well, you all so heard about springtime, life returns in such galore. And because it wasn't all